Emma Holloway stared at the weathered envelope in her hands, postmarked from Savannah Creek, Georgia. The letter inside was brief, written in a formal tone that did little to soften the news. Her great-uncle Wallace had died, and she was his sole heir. The property, a colonial-era house that had belonged to the Holloway family since 1876, was now hers. "I didn't even know I had family in Georgia," Emma said, showing the letter to her boyfriend Daniel. Daniel glanced up from his laptop. "Are you going to go see it?" Emma ran her fingers over the old photograph that had accompanied the letter. The house was imposing. 3 stories of faded red brick with white columns and black shutters, Spanish moss draped from ancient oaks that flanked the property like silent sentinels. "I don't have a choice. According to this lawyer, Mr. Harmon, I need to sign papers in person. Besides," she added, studying the photograph more closely, "I just turned 27 yesterday. Maybe this is the universe's birthday gift." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Emma, didn't you tell me once that your mom died when she was 27? And your grandmother too?" Emma nodded slowly. "Heart condition. Genetic, supposedly. My doctor says I'm fine, though." She forced a smile. "Anyway, it's just a coincidence. The drive from Philadelphia to coastal Georgia took nearly 14 hours. As Emma crossed the state line, the late September air grew thicker, heavy with humidity that clung to her skin. The GPS guided her off the highway and onto increasingly narrow roads until she found herself on a long, unpaved driveway. The Holloway house emerged from behind a curtain of moss-draped trees, larger and more imposing than the photograph had suggested. Paint peeled from the shutters, and several windows were boarded over. The wraparound porch sagged at one corner. Mr. Harmon, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, was waiting on the front steps. "Ms. Holloway," he greeted her, extending a bony hand, "I trust your journey was uneventful." Emma nodded, distracted by the house looming behind him. "It's bigger than I expected." 4,000 square feet, plus the carriage house out back," Harmon said. "Shall we go inside? I have the paperwork ready." The front door creaked open to reveal a dimly lit foyer. Despite the house's obvious neglect, the antique furniture inside appeared well preserved, covered with white sheets like ghosts in a mausoleum. "Your great-uncle Wallace lived here alone for nearly 40 years, Harmon explained as they walked through the ground floor. "He was quite the recluse after his wife passed." "I never knew him," Emma said, "or any of the Holloways from this branch of the family." Harmon paused, adjusting his glasses. "That's not unusual. There aren't many Holloways left, I'm afraid. The family has a rather unfortunate history." Something in his tone made Emma uneasy. "What do you mean?" "Just that they tend not to live very long lives," he said carefully. "Some sort of genetic condition, I believe." Emma felt a chill despite the stuffy air. "My mother died young. Her mother, too." Harmon nodded, as if this confirmed something. "Perhaps that explains why Wallace was so insistent the house go to you. You're the last of the line." Later, as Emma signed the final documents in what had once been the library, she asked, "How did my great-uncle die?" Harmon hesitated. His heart gave out. He was found at the foot of the main staircase. "How old was he?" 27, Harmon said quietly. "Same as you are now." Emma spent her first night in the Holloway house alone, despite Daniel's protests over the phone. "It's just an old house," she assured him. "Besides, the lawyer said the electricity and water are still connected." But as darkness fell, Emma began to question her decision. The house seemed to breathe around her, its ancient timber expanding and contracting with the cooling night air. Floorboards creaked without being stepped on. Pipes knocked in the walls. Unable to sleep, Emma descended to the library, where earlier that day she had signed the paperwork, making her the official owner. The room was lined with bookshelves, housing leather-bound volumes and faded photographs in tarnished silver frames. She switched on a dusty table lamp and began examining the photos. Many showed solemn-faced men and women in period clothing, standing stiffly before the house. One particular image caught her attention, a family portrait from what appeared to be the early 1900s. A husband, wife, and 3 children stood on the very porch Emma had crossed that afternoon. On the back, someone had written, "The Holloway family, 1905. Jonathan, deceased 1906, age 27, Margaret, and children." Emma frowned, setting the photo aside. She picked up another, this one showing a young woman in a 1940s dress. The inscription read, "Elizabeth Holloway, 1945. Deceased 1946, age 27. A pattern was emerging that sent a chill down Emma's spine. She moved quickly through the remaining photographs, checking the inscriptions. Name after name, year after year, members of the Holloway family who had died at 27, including her mother, including her grandmother, including great-uncle Wallace. The clock on the mantel chimed midnight, startling Emma. She decided to check the family Bible, typically used to record births, marriages, and deaths. She found it on a bottom shelf, its leather binding cracked with age. The genealogy pages confirmed what the photographs had suggested. Since 1876, when the house was built, no Holloway who had lived in the house had survived past their 27th year. Heart failure was the most common cause of death, though there were also accidents, sudden illnesses, and a few suicides. Emma closed the Bible with shaking hands. Her own 27th birthday had passed just 3 days ago. As if responding to her fear, the house seemed to groan around her. A door slammed somewhere upstairs, though there was no breeze. Emma told herself it was just the old house settling, but her racing heart believed otherwise. She needed to know more about the family history, about the house, about why Wallace had left it specifically to her, knowing, surely he must have known, what happened to Holloways who lived here. In the corner of the library stood an antique secretary desk. Emma tried its drawers, finding most locked, but one slid open. Inside was a small leather journal with the name Margaret Holloway embossed on the cover, the same Margaret from the 1905 photograph. Emma opened the journal to its first entry, dated April 18, 1876. "Today we moved into our new home. Jonathan is so proud of what he has accomplished, though I cannot share his enthusiasm. Something about this place unsettles me. The land was purchased too cheaply, the construction completed too quickly. The local workers whisper about the property. They say the ground is soured. They say we should not have built here. Jonathan dismisses their concerns as superstition, but I am not so certain. I feel watched in every room." Emma continued reading until her eyes grew heavy. Margaret's journal documented strange occurrences in the house, unexplained noises, sudden temperature drops, objects moving on their own. Jonathan had dismissed his wife's concerns, but as the entries continued, even he began to experience unexplainable events. The final entry was dated March 10th, 1906. "It has taken him. Whatever dwells in this house has claimed my Jonathan, just as it threatened. His heart simply stopped," the doctor says, though Jonathan was in perfect health. He was 27 years old. "I must take the children and leave this cursed place before it claims them too. May God forgive us for what was unearthed when the foundation was laid." Emma closed the journal, her hands trembling. She needed to know what had been unearthed when the house was built. What could possibly cause a century-long curse that claimed the lives of Holloways when they reached 27? As if in answer to her unspoken question, the lights flickered and died, plunging the library into darkness. Emma fumbled for her phone, activating its flashlight. The beam seemed feeble against the oppressive darkness of the library. She had to get out, to call Daniel, to tell someone what she had discovered. But as she moved toward the door, a loud thump from above stopped her in her tracks. Something heavy had fallen, or someone was moving around on the second floor. "Hello?" Emma called, immediately regretting it. If there was an intruder, she'd just given away her position. If there wasn't, well, she didn't want to consider the alternative. No answer came, but the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. Emma could see her breath forming small clouds in the beam of her flashlight. The cold intensified, burning her lungs with each inhale. Then came the whispers, so faint she might have imagined them had the house not been completely silent otherwise. Indistinct at first, then forming words she could almost understand. Something about the foundation and blood price. Emma backed toward the library door, keeping her flashlight trained on the room. The whispers grew louder, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Her back hit something solid. Not the door, something else, something that shouldn't have been there. Emma whirled around, raising her light. Nothing. The doorway was empty. But when she turned back to the library, a figure stood in the center of the room, the translucent silhouette of a man in period clothing, his features indistinct except for his eyes, which reflected the flashlight beam like a cat's. Emma screamed and ran, bursting through the library door and down the hallway toward the front entrance. Behind her, the temperature continued to plummet, the cold chasing her like a living thing. She fumbled with the front door's deadbolt, her fingers clumsy with fear. It finally gave way, and she stumbled onto the porch, gulping the warm night air. Emma didn't stop until she reached her car, locking herself inside. Her hands shook so badly she could barely dial Daniel's number. "Emma, it's 2 a.m. "Daniel, I need you," she gasped. "Something's wrong with this house. The Holloways, they all die at 27. Something about the foundation, a curse or—" "Slow down," Daniel said, fully awake now. "Are you saying the house is haunted?" "I don't know what I'm saying," Emma admitted, "but I found a journal from 1876. The original owner's wife wrote that something was unearthed when they laid the foundation. And now I've seen something, someone." "Listen to me," Daniel said firmly. "Get a hotel room for tonight. I'll drive down first thing in the morning. We'll figure this out together." Emma glanced back at the house. All the windows were dark except for one on the second floor, which now showed a faint light, though Emma knew she hadn't turned on any lights upstairs. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll call you when I'm somewhere safe." The nearest motel was 30 minutes away, a roadside establishment that had seen better days, but it had locks on the doors and bright fluorescent lighting that banished shadows, and that was all Emma cared about. Unable to sleep, she used the motel's spotty Wi-Fi to research the history of Savannah Creek and the Holloway house. There wasn't much. A few mentions in historical society records, property tax assessments. But one local history blog contained an interesting note. Before Jonathan Holloway purchased the land in 1875, it had belonged to a wealthy plantation owner who lost everything after the Civil War. The land had been considered worthless because of its proximity to what locals called the sinking grounds, a section of marsh that was said to swallow both livestock and people. Emma scrolled further, finding a scanned newspaper article from 1874. "Tragedy at former Henderson plantation. 3 workers lost to sinking grounds." The article described how 3 men hired to survey the property had disappeared into a sinkhole that suddenly opened beneath them. Their bodies were never recovered. The property was sold a year later to northern businessman Jonathan Holloway, who plans to build a fine home on the bluff overlooking the marsh. Emma stared at the screen, putting the pieces together. Jonathan had built his house on land where people had died, land the locals considered cursed, and according to Margaret's journal, something had been unearthed during construction. When Daniel arrived the next morning, Emma showed him everything she had discovered. The journal, the family Bible with its record of deaths, the online research about the property's history. "I think I need to look at the foundation," she concluded. "Whatever's happening, it started there." Daniel frowned. "Emma, this is crazy. There must be a rational explanation for all of this. Maybe there's a gas leak in the house causing hallucinations. Or maybe the family really does have a genetic heart condition. That doesn't explain what I saw in the library," Emma insisted. "Besides, I need to know. I'm 27 now, same as all the others when they died." Daniel sighed, recognizing the determined set of Emma's jaw. "Fine, but we go together, and we leave at the first sign of anything dangerous." They returned to the Holloway house in daylight. It looked less menacing under the bright Georgia sun, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as they approached the front steps. Inside, everything was as Emma had left it during her hasty escape the night before. The library door stood open, books and photographs scattered where she had dropped them. "We need to find access to the basement or crawl space," Emma said. "There has to be a way to examine the foundation." They found a door under the main staircase that opened to reveal a narrow set of wooden steps descending into darkness. Daniel used his phone's flashlight to illuminate the way as they carefully made their way down. The basement was surprisingly large, extending beneath the entire house. Support beams created a forest of wooden columns, among which various discarded items had been stored. Broken furniture, trunks filled with moldering clothes, stacks of yellowed newspapers. "The foundation should be along the outer walls," Daniel said, moving his light toward the perimeter. What they found was unlike any foundation either of them had seen before. Instead of a continuous concrete footing, the Holloway house rested on massive stone blocks, arranged in a precise pattern. Symbols had been carved into each block, ancient-looking glyphs that reminded Emma of the protective sigils she'd seen in museums. "This isn't standard construction," Daniel murmured, tracing one of the symbols with his finger. "These look like they were placed deliberately." Emma moved her own light along the wall of foundation stones. "Look at this one," she called, pointing to a block larger than the others. Unlike the rest, this stone was reddish-brown and marked with different symbols. It seemed to have been inserted into a gap in the original foundation. As Emma's light fell on it, the air around the stone seemed to shimmer, and the whispers she had heard the night before returned, louder now. Daniel heard them too. She could tell by the way he stiffened beside her. "We should go," he said, backing away. But Emma moved closer, drawn to the anomalous stone. This has to be it. Whatever was unearthed when they built the house. As she reached out to touch it, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The trembling intensified, dust and small debris raining down from the ceiling above. Daniel grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her back from the strange red stone. "We need to get out of here," he shouted over the growing rumble. "The whole place could collapse." But as they turned to flee, the wooden stairs leading up to the main house splintered and collapsed, blocking their exit. They were trapped in the basement as the earth continued to shake. Emma's flashlight beam caught movement near the red foundation stone. The wall around it was shifting. The mortar between the stones crumbled away as if dissolving, and the red stone itself began to push outward, protruding from the wall. "Daniel," Emma whispered, pointing. They watched in horror as the stone broke free entirely, falling to the basement floor with a heavy thud. Behind it was not solid earth, as expected, but an opening, a tunnel leading into darkness. The shaking stopped abruptly, leaving them in eerie silence, broken only by their rapid breathing. "What the hell is that?" Daniel asked, directing his light toward the opening. The tunnel was roughly circular, about 4 feet in diameter, its walls unnaturally smooth. It extended beyond the reach of their flashlights, angling slightly downward. "It looks man-made," Emma said, approaching cautiously. "Or not man-made, but deliberately created somehow." A cool breeze emanated from the tunnel, carrying with it a musty, ancient smell, and something else, a faint whispering that seemed to call to Emma specifically. "We can't go in there," Daniel said firmly, catching her expression. "We need to find another way out of this basement and get help." Emma nodded, but she couldn't take her eyes off the tunnel entrance. The whispers grew more distinct, and she could almost understand them now, something about the last Holloway and fulfilling the pact. They searched the basement for another exit, finding only small ventilation windows near the ceiling, too small for either of them to fit through. Daniel tried calling for help, but there was no cell service underground. "We'll have to move some of this junk and build a way up to those windows," Daniel said, already dragging a heavy trunk beneath one of the openings. But Emma found herself drawn back to the tunnel. The red stone that had blocked it lay on the ground, and in the better light provided by their combined flashlights, she could see that the symbols carved into it were different from those on the other foundation stones. These weren't protective sigils, they were binding marks. Something had been contained behind that stone, something that was now free. As if confirming her thoughts, a soft glow began to emanate from deep within the tunnel, a pulsing bluish light that grew steadily brighter. The whispers intensified, becoming a chorus of voices calling her name. "Daniel," Emma called, her voice tight with fear. He turned from his work on their escape route, eyes widening at the sight of the illuminated tunnel. "What's happening?" Before Emma could respond, the glow surged forward, flooding out of the tunnel and into the basement. It coalesced into swirling patterns that danced around them like living smoke, taking half-formed shapes, faces, hands, writhing tendrils. Within the luminous mist, Emma could see distinct figures now, translucent human forms in clothing from various eras. She recognized some from the photographs upstairs. Her Holloway ancestors, all of them frozen at 27 years old. One figure separated from the others, approaching Emma. It was a man in 19th century attire, Jonathan Holloway, the original owner. His voice, when he spoke, seemed to come from everywhere at once. "The last Holloway has returned to fulfill the pact." "What pact?" Emma demanded, Daniel now at her side, his hand gripping hers tightly. "The one I made to build this house," Jonathan's ghost replied. "I wanted wealth and success. I found both here, but at a price. The entity beneath the sinking grounds required blood, a Holloway life every generation." "What entity?" Daniel asked. "What's down there?" Jonathan's form flickered. "Something ancient, something hungry. It was trapped when I built the foundation, but not completely. It takes us when we reach the height of our power, our 27th year." Emma felt a cold certainty settle over her. "And now it wants me." Jonathan nodded, his form growing fainter. "Unless you break the cycle. Find what binds us in the tunnel, destroy it." "Don't listen to him," Daniel urged. "This can't be real. We need to get out of here." But the spectral shapes of her ancestors surrounded Emma, their whispers blending into a single plea. "Free us." The blue light began to retreat into the tunnel, and the ghostly figures faded with it. Emma made a sudden decision and lunged toward the opening. "Emma, no!" Daniel shouted, grabbing for her arm but missing. "I have to know what's down there," she called back. "I have to end this or I'll die, just like they did." The tunnel was wider than it had appeared, allowing Emma to move in a crouched position. The smooth walls felt oddly warm to the touch, almost like living tissue. The blue glow had retreated further, but remained visible ahead, leading her downward. Behind her she could hear Daniel cursing, then the sounds of him following her into the tunnel. "I'm not letting you do this alone," he called after her. They descended for what felt like hundreds of feet, the tunnel occasionally widening into small chambers before narrowing again. The air grew increasingly stale and damp. Finally, the tunnel opened into a vast underground cavern. The blue light illuminated a space larger than the house above, with a ceiling that arched at least 30 feet overhead. The floor was not earth, but smooth stone, arranged in a circular pattern around a central depression filled with dark water, a pool that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Standing at the edge of this underground lake, Emma felt a presence, ancient and vast, rising from its depths. The water began to bubble and churn. Daniel caught up to her, panting from the descent. "Emma, we need to go now." But Emma's attention was fixed on an object near the pool's edge, a small stone altar, upon which rested an ancient book, bound in what looked like human skin. Next to it lay a rusted knife, crusted with centuries-old blood. "That's it," she whispered, recognizing the binding symbols carved into the altar, identical to those on the red stone that had blocked the tunnel. "That's what Jonathan used to make his pact." As she spoke, the water in the pool rose up, forming a column that twisted and turned upon itself. Within the churning liquid, faces appeared, not human faces but something older, with too many eyes and mouths that opened in impossible ways. A voice boomed through the cavern, echoing from the water itself. "The last Holloway comes to pay the debt." Emma stepped forward despite Daniel's attempt to hold her back. "I'm not here to pay anything. I'm here to end this." The water column shuddered, its many faces contorting in what might have been anger or amusement. "The pact cannot be broken. A Holloway life sustains me. Without it, all that was built above will fall. All who dwell there will perish." Emma looked at the book on the altar, understanding dawning. Jonathan hadn't just made a deal for wealth, he had tied the very existence of the house to this entity. The Holloway deaths weren't just payment, they were a form of energy, feeding whatever lived in this underground pool. "What if I offer something else?" Emma asked, a plan forming. "Not a life, but a binding, a new pact." The water column twisted closer. "Speak." Emma glanced at Daniel, whose face was pale with fear, then back to the entity. "Release the Holloways who came before. End the cycle of deaths at 27. In return, I'll ensure you remain contained but not forgotten. I'll maintain the house, preserve its history, keep your story alive." There was a long silence, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against stone. "Stories are power," the entity finally acknowledged. "Memory is sustenance of a kind, but the binding must be sealed in blood, freely given." Emma picked up the rusted knife from beside the altar. "My blood, not my life," she clarified. The water column undulated in what appeared to be agreement. Daniel grabbed her arm. "Emma, don't. We don't know what this thing is or what it's really asking." "I know what happens if I don't," she replied. "I die at 27, just like all the others, and then you die too because you're here with me." She met his eyes. "I have to try." Before he could stop her, Emma drew the knife across her palm, wincing at the sharp pain. Blood welled up, bright red against her skin. She held her hand over the edge of the pool, allowing drops of blood to fall into the dark water. "I, Emma Holloway, last of my line, offer this blood freely to bind a new pact. Release those who came before. Accept my memory-keeping as payment instead of life." The moment her blood touched the water, the entire cavern began to vibrate. The blue light intensified until it was nearly blinding. The water column surged upward, reaching for the ceiling, then crashed back down with such force that Emma and Daniel were knocked off their feet. When they could see again, the pool was calm, its surface flat as glass. The oppressive presence had diminished, though not disappeared entirely. Around them, the ghostly figures of the Holloways reappeared. But they were different now, more substantial, their faces peaceful. One by one they nodded to Emma, then faded away completely. Jonathan was the last to disappear. "The pact is altered," he said, "but not ended. Remember your promise, Emma Holloway. Keep our story. Keep the house. Or it will begin again." Then he too was gone. Daniel helped Emma to her feet. "What just happened? Did you just make a deal with some kind of entity?" Emma bandaged her hand with a strip torn from her shirt. "I think I just changed the terms. Instead of dying at 27, I have to preserve the house and the Holloway history. Be a caretaker instead of a sacrifice." They made their way back up the tunnel, which seemed less ominous now. When they reached the basement, they found that the fallen stairs had somehow reassembled themselves, offering a clear path back to the main house. The red stone that had blocked the tunnel entrance lay where it had fallen, but as they watched, it crumbled into dust, leaving no trace of the opening behind it. 3 months passed since Emma's confrontation with the entity beneath the Holloway house. Winter had settled over Savannah Creek, bringing crisp mornings and early sunsets. Emma had spent the time meticulously restoring the house, using her inheritance from Wallace to hire local contractors for the major repairs while handling the smaller details herself. Daniel had returned to Philadelphia, his teaching position requiring his presence, but he visited on weekends and holidays. Today, was one such visit, the week between Christmas and New Year's, and he found Emma in the library, cataloguing the family's extensive book collection. "You've been busy," he observed, taking in the newly organized shelves and the leather-bound journal open on the desk. Emma smiled, setting down her pen. "I'm keeping my promise, preserving the family history." She gestured to the journal. "I'm recording everything, what happened to us, what I learned about the original pact, the stories of all the Holloways who died at 27. Daniel ran his fingers along a shelf of restored photograph albums. "And the house looks amazing. You've done more in 3 months than most people could do in a year." It was true. The Holloway house had been transformed. The sagging porch was reinforced, the peeling paint refreshed, the broken windows replaced. Inside, the antique furniture had been carefully restored, the hardwood floors refinished to a warm glow. But the most significant change was below. The basement had been professionally sealed, the foundation reinforced with modern materials while carefully preserving the original stone blocks and their protective sigils. The space where the tunnel entrance had been was now covered by a concrete wall emblazoned with symbols Emma had designed based on those in Jonathan's book, symbols of containment, not binding. "I've been meaning to ask," Daniel said, settling into an armchair across from her. "How do you feel? Any side effects from your deal?" Emma considered the question. She had worried, initially, that altering the pact might have unforeseen consequences, that perhaps she had traded one curse for another. But the only noticeable change had been a heightened sensitivity to the house itself. She could sense its moods, feel when something was wrong or out of place. "I'm fine," she assured him. "Healthy. No heart problems, no ghostly visitations." She paused. "Sometimes I think I can hear whispers, but they're not threatening anymore. More like reminders." Daniel nodded, though she could see the lingering concern in his eyes. He had witnessed everything in that cavern, yet still struggled to fully accept what had happened. Emma didn't blame him. Sometimes she could hardly believe it herself. "And what about your research?" he asked, changing the subject. Found anything new about the entity?" Emma had spent considerable time investigating the origins of whatever lived beneath the Holloway house. The local historical society had provided some insights. Legends of Native American tribes who had avoided the sinking grounds long before European settlers arrived, considering it a place where the boundary between worlds was thin. "Nothing definitive," she admitted. "But I have a theory. I think whatever's down there is much older than the house. Older than colonial America, maybe even prehistoric." She showed him a book she'd acquired from a specialist in regional folklore, a collection of myths about entities that dwelled in underground pools and demanded sacrifices. "The interesting thing is that these stories appear in cultures all over the world," she explained. Ancient civilizations built structures over subterranean water sources they believed housed powerful beings. They made offerings to ensure prosperity. So Jonathan Holloway accidentally tapped into something primal," Daniel mused. "Something that's been part of human belief systems for thousands of years." "Not accidentally," Emma corrected. "The symbols on those foundation stones are too deliberate. I think he knew exactly what he was doing. He found something ancient and tried to harness it, bind it to serve his purposes." Daniel frowned. "But at the cost of his own life, and the lives of generations of Holloways after him. Why would anyone agree to that?" Emma gestured around them. "For this, wealth, success, the Holloways were prominent in this region for decades. Jonathan built an empire, even if he didn't live long to enjoy it." That evening, they hosted a small gathering of neighbors and local historians, part of Emma's effort to integrate into the community and gather more information about the house's history. Among the guests was Mr. Harmon, the lawyer who had handled Wallace's estate. As the party wound down, Harmon approached Emma where she stood alone by the fireplace. "The house looks remarkable, Miss Holloway," he said. "You've done wonders in such a short time." "Thank you," Emma replied. "It's become a labor of love." Harmon studied her with those same wire-rimmed glasses he'd worn at their first meeting. "You seem, well, particularly for someone approaching their 28th birthday." The comment caught Emma off guard. "I'm sorry." "Oh, just an observation," Harmon said mildly. "Your great-uncle Wallace was quite concerned about you reaching that milestone. He mentioned it often in his final months." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air outside. Did Wallace know about the family history? About what happened to Holloways at 27? Harmon's expression revealed nothing. Wallace knew many things about this house and its unusual properties. He was most insistent that the property pass specifically to you when he was gone. "Why me?" Emma asked, the question that had been haunting her for months. "Perhaps because you were the last," Harmon suggested. "Or perhaps because he believed you would be the one to change things." He glanced around as if ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. "Wallace discovered something in his research, that the original pact could be altered by a Holloway of the blood who offered something other than their life." Emma's heart raced. "You knew? All this time you knew about the entity beneath the house?" Harmon adjusted his glasses. "My family has managed the legal affairs of the Holloway estate since 1876, Ms. Holloway. We are well acquainted with its peculiarities." "Why didn't you warn me?" "Would you have believed me?" Harmon asked reasonably. "Besides, some journeys must be undertaken without foreknowledge of their destination." He handed her a business card. "If you ever need assistance with the more esoteric aspects of property management, do call. My family has experience in such matters." After the guests departed and Daniel had gone up to bed, Emma returned to the library. She opened the family Bible to the genealogy pages, where the deaths of Holloways at age 27 were recorded in fading ink. Next to her own name, which Wallace had added as the last entry, was a blank space where her death date would eventually be recorded. Emma took up a pen and carefully wrote across that space, "The pact altered, December 2023. She closed the Bible and placed it back on its shelf. In less than a month, she would turn 28, the first Holloway to do so since before the house was built. She didn't know what that milestone would bring, but for the first time, she felt hopeful about her future in the Holloway house. As she turned to leave, the lights flickered briefly and a whisper, barely audible, drifted through the room. "Remember." "I will," Emma promised quietly. "I won't forget." Spring arrived in Georgia with an explosion of color. Azaleas in vibrant pink, dogwoods with their delicate white blooms, and wisteria draping purple cascades from the trees. The Holloway house stood rejuvenated against this backdrop, its red brick glowing warm in the lengthening days. Emma had passed her 28th birthday in February, without incident. The day had come and gone, with no supernatural occurrences, no heart palpitations, no sense of impending doom. Daniel had flown down from Philadelphia to celebrate with her, bringing champagne and a cautious optimism that perhaps the curse was truly broken. Now, in early April, Emma was continuing her work documenting the house and its history. She had converted one of the smaller bedrooms into an office, where she catalogued photographs, letters, and artifacts found throughout the property. Today she was examining a collection of items discovered in a hidden compartment behind a loose brick in the east wing: a silver pocket watch, several folded papers, and a small wooden box containing a lock of dark hair tied with faded ribbon. The papers proved most interesting. They were letters between Jonathan Holloway and a local man named Elijah Blackwood, dated 1875 to 1876, during the construction of the house. Emma carefully unfolded the brittle pages, revealing spidery handwriting in faded ink. The first letter, from Blackwood to Jonathan, mentioned specialized construction techniques for building on the difficult site Jonathan had purchased. It made reference to accommodating the peculiarities of the sinking grounds and offered services at a price beyond mere financial compensation. Jonathan's reply expressed skepticism but interest. While I dismiss the local superstitions about the property, I cannot ignore the practical challenges of building on such terrain. If your methods can ensure a stable foundation, I am prepared to discuss terms. The final letter in the collection, dated just before construction began, contained a crude diagram of the foundation design. The same pattern of stone blocks with symbols that Emma had seen in the basement. At the bottom, a single line chilled her. The agreement is sealed. Payment as discussed. When due. Emma set the letters aside, troubled by their implications. Jonathan hadn't stumbled upon the entity by accident during construction. He had sought out someone with knowledge of it, had made arrangements before the first stone was laid. She picked up the pocket watch, turning it over in her hands. The silver case was engraved with the initials E.B., Elijah Blackwood. Inside, the watch had stopped at 3:27, and a small inscription read, "The price of knowledge." Emma was lost in thought when her phone rang, startling her. It was Daniel. "Hey," she answered. "How are your midterm grades coming along?" "Slowly," he sighed. "But that's not why I'm calling. I've found something interesting about your friend Elijah Blackwood." Emma sat up straighter. "How did you know I was just reading about him?" "I didn't," Daniel said, surprise evident in his voice. "That's a strange coincidence. I've been researching historical figures in Savannah Creek for that article I'm writing. Remember, Blackwood's name kept coming up in connection with several prominent families in the 1870s. "What did you find?" Emma asked, glancing at the pocket watch still in her hand. "He was some kind of consultant for wealthy families building houses in the region. Officially a surveyor and architectural advisor, but there were rumors about his other services." Daniel paused. "Emma, 3 different families who worked with him lost members to sudden deaths, all at the same age." 27, Emma whispered. "Yes. How did you know?" "The letters I found today. Blackwood helped Jonathan design the foundation for the Holloway house." She described the correspondence she'd discovered. "I think Blackwood was some kind of middleman between Jonathan and the entity. He knew how to communicate with it, how to make deals." "There's more," Daniel continued. "I found a newspaper article about Blackwood's death in 1880. His body was discovered at the edge of the sinking grounds, with no apparent cause of death. He was 27 years old." Emma felt a chill despite the warm April air filtering through the window. "He made his own deal with the entity. It looks that way. And get this, after his death, his younger brother continued the family business. 3 more prominent houses built in the 1880s. 3 more families with suspicious patterns of deaths." Emma thought about the implications. The entity beneath the Holloway house might not be unique. There could be others, or the same one could be connected to multiple properties throughout the region. "Daniel, I need to find out if those other houses are still standing, if there are other families still paying the price." "Already ahead of you," he replied. 2 were demolished in the 1950s during highway construction. The 3rd burned down in 1921. As far as I can tell, the Holloway house is the only one that survived. That night, Emma dreamed of the underground cavern. In her dream, the dark pool extended far beyond the chamber she had seen, branching into tunnels that reached beneath other houses, other towns. Whispers echoed through these subterranean passages, not just the voices of Holloways, but others, dozens of families bound by similar pacts. She awoke with a start, heart racing. The bedside clock read 3:27 a.m., the same time shown on Blackwood's pocket watch. Emma rose, pulling on a robe against the unexpected chill in the room. She felt drawn downstairs, her bare feet silent on the polished hardwood floors. In the library, the lamp she had left on cast a warm circle of light around her desk, where the letters and pocket watch still lay. But something new had been added. The family Bible, which Emma distinctly remembered returning to its shelf, now lay open to the genealogy pages. As she approached, Emma saw that something had changed in the record. Next to her own name, where she had written "The Pact Altered," Additional words had appeared in a handwriting not her own. The burden transferred. What does that mean? Emma whispered to the empty room. The temperature dropped further, her breath fogging in the air. From the walls came a familiar whisper. Remember the promise. I've kept my promise, Emma said firmly. I've restored the house, preserved the history. Not all promises are yours to keep, came the whispered reply. Some were made before you. A floorboard creaked near the doorway, and Emma turned to find a figure standing there, not a ghost, but a solid human form. Mr. Harmon, the lawyer, dressed impeccably despite the late hour. How did you get in here? Emma demanded, startled by his sudden appearance. Harmon stepped into the circle of lamplight, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the glow. The Harmon family has always had access to the Holloway house, he said calmly, just as the Blackwoods once did. Emma's mind raced. You're related to Elijah Blackwood. His great-great-grandson, Harmon confirmed. After Elijah's unfortunate demise, my family took over certain administrative duties for the agreements he brokered. You're the middleman now, Emma realized, between the families and the entity. Harmon inclined his head slightly. A custodian of old promises, though the Holloway house is the last remaining property under my care. He gestured to the open Bible. You've altered your family's agreement, but there are consequences to such changes. And what consequences? Emma asked, tension building in her chest. The entity still requires sustenance. If not a Holloway life, then something else of equal value. Harmon adjusted his glasses. The burden has been transferred, Ms. Holloway, to the next suitable vessel. A horrible realization dawned on Emma. Daniel, she whispered, your young man has involved himself deeply in matters that don't concern him. Harmon said dispassionately. Research into the Blackwoods, the other houses. He's drawn attention to himself. No, Emma said firmly. The deal was between me and the entity. Daniel wasn't part of it. You offered to preserve memories, to keep the story alive, Harmon reminded her. But stories spread, knowledge transfers. When your professor began his research, he became part of the narrative. Emma's phone rang suddenly, the sound jarring in the quiet room. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. You should answer that, Harmon suggested. He's likely calling about the chest pains that just woke him. Emma grabbed the phone with trembling hands. Daniel, are you okay? Daniel's voice was strained. Something's wrong, Emma. I woke up with this pressure in my chest. It's like I can't breathe properly. Call an ambulance, Emma instructed, shooting a glare at Harmon. I'm on my way to Philadelphia. After ensuring Daniel was seeking medical help, Emma turned back to the lawyer. How do I stop this? You understand so little of what you've done. Harmon sighed. The entity feeds on potential, the unfulfilled promise of a life cut short at its peak. When you denied it your life, it simply sought another connected to you in the house. Then I'll break the connection, Emma declared. I'll sell the house, leave Savannah Creek. Harmon shook his head. The pact follows the bloodline, not the property. Your great-uncle Wallace tried leaving. He made it to Oregon before his heart gave out, on his 27th birthday, in a motel room 2,000 miles from here. Emma thought frantically. There had to be a solution, a way to protect Daniel. Then a possibility occurred to her, a desperate gambit. What if I offer a different kind of potential, she asked. Not a life, but a creation. Something with the promise of continuation. Harmon raised an eyebrow. What are you suggesting? My work, Emma said. I'm writing a book about the Holloway house, the entity, everything that's happened. It contains all the knowledge I've gathered, the symbols, the history, the truth about the pacts. If published, it could expose everything. That would be unwise, Harmon said carefully. Unless I make it part of a new deal, Emma pressed. The potential of this book, the impact it could have, that's valuable, isn't it? More valuable than one life. Harmon studied her with newfound interest. You would bargain with your life's work? To save Daniel, yes. I'll offer my book, not to publish, but to contain here in the house, a repository of knowledge that grows with each generation, but never leaves these walls. Emma's mind raced ahead. Each Holloway will add to it, creating something of perpetually unfulfilled potential. The whispers in the walls grew louder, swirling around them like an invisible current. "It's listening," Harmon observed. "It's considering." Emma addressed the entity directly. "Release Daniel. Take my offer instead. A book of secrets that will grow but never be shared beyond these walls. Potential forever contained, like you." The room plunged into darkness, the lamp extinguished without warning. When light returned seconds later, Harmon was gone, and the Bible had closed itself. Emma's phone rang again. "Daniel." "The pain's gone," he said, sounding bewildered. "Just stopped all at once. The paramedics can't find anything wrong with me now." Emma closed her eyes in relief. "That's good. That's really good." "Emma, what's going on? Did you do something?" "I'll explain everything when I see you," she promised. "But I think it's going to be okay now." After they hung up, Emma returned to her office. She gathered all her research, the letters, the photographs, her notes about the confrontation in the cavern, and placed them in a leather-bound volume she had purchased for her planned book. On the first page she wrote, "The Holloway Chronicles, a record of pacts and promises, Volume 1, for the eyes of Holloways only, to be maintained and expanded by each generation, but never to leave the confines of the house. This is our burden now, our offering of perpetual potential." As she wrote the final words, the air in the room stirred, and a sense of acceptance, almost approval, settled over her. Emma had found a new way to keep her promise. The burden had been transferred once again, not to a person, but to a legacy that would grow with each passing generation of Holloways. The summer heat in Savannah Creek was oppressive, thick humidity hanging in the air like a sodden blanket. Emma sat at her desk in the library, a glass of iced tea sweating beside her as she worked on the manuscript that had become her life's focus over the past months. The Holloway Chronicles had grown to over 300 pages, filled with meticulously documented family history, detailed accounts of her experiences with the entity, and reproductions of the symbols found throughout the house. She had even included blood analyses from medical records she'd obtained, tracking the unusual genetic markers that appeared in every Holloway who had lived in the house. Daniel entered, carrying a stack of photocopied newspaper articles. Since recovering from his mysterious heart episode in April, he had thrown himself into helping Emma with her research, though he remained in Philadelphia most of the time, coming to Georgia only on weekends and breaks from teaching. "Found something interesting in the university archives," he said, setting the papers down. "Records of other properties in the southeast with similar patterns of deaths, all built between 1850 and 1890, all with unusual foundation designs." Emma leafed through the articles. "Blackwood's influence spread further than we thought. Not just Blackwood. Look at this." Daniel pointed to a name that appeared repeatedly in the records: Harmon and Associates, property managers. "Your lawyer's family has been managing these properties for generations." "Custodians of old promises," Emma murmured, recalling Harmon's words. The lawyer had not returned to the Holloway house since their late-night encounter in April, but Emma occasionally received formal correspondence about property tax matters or maintenance recommendations, always signed with his precise, slanting script. "There's more," Daniel continued. "I cross-referenced the family names associated with these properties against census and death records. In every case, the deaths at 27 stopped around the same time, the 1950s. Emma frowned. "That can't be a coincidence." "I don't think it is. Something happened in that decade that changed the nature of these pacts." Daniel hesitated. "I have a theory, but it's out there. After everything we've seen, I'm open to out there," Emma assured him. Daniel sat across from her. The 1950s saw massive infrastructure development, highways, dams, large-scale engineering projects. What if something about that development disrupted the underground network we saw in your dream, the tunnels connecting these entities? Emma considered this. Isolated, they would have less power, maybe not enough to enforce the original terms of their pacts. Exactly, so they adapted, accepted lesser offerings like your book instead of lives. The idea made sense. Emma had theorized that the entity beneath the Holloway house was ancient, predating human settlement in the region. It would have experienced countless changes in the landscape above it, adapting to survive each time. If that's true, she said slowly, then the chronicles are even more important. They're not just a record of my family's experience, but documentation of how these entities interact with our world over time. Daniel looked troubled. But remember the terms of your new pact. The chronicles can never leave this house. This knowledge will die with us. Not die, Emma corrected. Just remain contained, like the entity itself. That night, after Daniel had gone to bed, Emma continued working. The thunderstorm that had threatened all day finally broke, rain lashing against the windows while lightning illuminated the library in brief, brilliant flashes. Emma was so absorbed in her writing that she didn't notice the subtle changes at first. The gradual drop in temperature, the way the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen and shift. A particularly violent thunderclap shook the house, and when Emma looked up from her manuscript, she was no longer alone. A woman stood on the other side of her desk, tall and slender, dressed in clothing from the early 1900s. Her face was hauntingly familiar, sharing the same high cheekbones and determined jaw that Emma saw in her own mirror. "Margaret," Emma whispered, recognizing Jonathan Holloway's wife from the photographs. The apparition nodded. Unlike the translucent spectral forms Emma had encountered in the basement months ago, Margaret appeared almost solid, only a subtle shimmer at her edges betraying her supernatural nature. "You've changed things," Margaret said, her voice carrying the faint accent of old New England, "altered the balance that has sustained this house for generations." "I found another way," Emma replied, "one that doesn't require Holloway lives." Margaret moved to the bookshelves, running insubstantial fingers along the spines. "For now, but the hunger beneath us is patient. It will accept your chronicles for a time, feeding on the potential of knowledge unrevealed. But eventually, it will want more." A chill ran down Emma's spine. "What do you mean?" "Your blood still carries the mark," Margaret explained. "Any children you bear will be bound to this house, to the pact. They may not die at 27, but they will be drawn here, compelled to continue your work." The realization hit Emma like a physical blow. She had saved herself, saved Daniel, but potentially condemned future generations to a different kind of servitude. "How do you know this?" she asked. "I exist between worlds now," Margaret said simply. "I hear things, the whispers in the walls, the promises exchanged in darkness. The entity speaks often of your children yet to come." "I don't have children," Emma protested. Margaret's expression softened. "But you will. The entity has seen it. A daughter, born with the same mark in her blood. A son who will feel the pull of this place even from across oceans." Emma's hand moved unconsciously to her abdomen. She wasn't pregnant, she was certain of that, but the possibility had been on her mind lately. She and Daniel had discussed marriage, a future together. Children had been part of that imagined future. "What can I do?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the storm outside. "Complete your chronicles," Margaret advised. "Document everything, the symbols, the pacts, the bloodlines. Knowledge is power, even when contained." She glanced toward the ceiling, as if looking through it to the rooms above. "The man who sleeps upstairs, he is not bound by blood. He can take what you create and hide it where even the entity cannot see. But the pact was made by you, not him," Margaret finished. "He can carry copies beyond these walls, ensure they reach others who might need them someday." Hope flickered in Emma's chest. A loophole. Margaret nodded, a sad smile crossing her features. "Jonathan was clever with contracts in life. He taught me to look for the spaces between words, the promises not explicitly made." Lightning flashed again, and in that moment of brilliance, Margaret's form became truly transparent, the bookshelves visible through her body. "I am fading," she said, her voice growing fainter. "The new pact weakens the connections between us and this place. Soon, none of us will be able to reach you." "Wait," Emma called. "There's so much more I need to ask you." Margaret was barely visible now, little more than an outline against the darkness. "Trust your blood," her voice whispered. "It remembers what your mind cannot." With a final flicker, she vanished, leaving Emma alone in the library as thunder rumbled in the distance, the storm moving away. Emma sat motionless for several minutes, processing what had just occurred. Then, with sudden determination, she pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward her and began to write, not for the Chronicles this time, but a separate document, one that would leave the Holloway house with Daniel. By dawn, she had completed both, the latest chapter of the Chronicles describing her encounter with Margaret, and a condensed version containing the most critical information about the entity, the pact, and the symbols of binding and protection. The latter she sealed in an envelope addressed to Daniel, with instructions not to open it until he had returned to Philadelphia. When he came downstairs for breakfast, Emma handed him the envelope. "Take this with you when you leave tomorrow," she said. "Read it only when you're home, and then decide what to do with it." Daniel looked confused, but accepted the envelope. "What's this about?" "Insurance," Emma said simply, "in case things change." That evening, after a day spent exploring Savannah Creek together, Emma and Daniel sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies illuminate the gathering dusk. The air was still heavy with humidity, but a gentle breeze made it bearable. "I've been thinking," Daniel said, breaking a comfortable silence. "What if I moved down here? Permanently, I mean. I could apply for positions at universities in Atlanta or Savannah." Emma turned to him in surprise. "You'd leave Philadelphia? Your tenure-track position?" He shrugged. "For you, yes. This long-distance thing is getting old, and honestly, I'm becoming as invested in this house and its mysteries as you are." Emma's heart constricted with both love and fear. She wanted nothing more than to have Daniel with her always, but Margaret's warning echoed in her mind. The entity had already shown it could affect him, even from a distance. "What about children?" she asked suddenly. "Do you want them? Someday, I mean." Daniel looked startled by the abrupt change of subject, but considered the question. "Yes, I think so. I've always pictured myself as a dad eventually." He studied her face. "Why? Is this something you've been thinking about?" Emma chose her words carefully. "I'm worried about what it would mean to raise children here, in this house, with everything we know about it." Understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes. "You're concerned they'd be affected by the entity. Bound to it like you are." "Margaret, Jonathan's wife, visited me last night," Emma admitted. "She said any children I have will carry the mark in their blood. They'll be drawn to this place, compelled to continue the Chronicles." Daniel was silent for a long moment, processing this information. Finally he said, "Then we'll prepare them. Teach them the truth from the beginning. Give them the choice you never had." "And if the entity tries to claim them?" Emma pressed. "If it decides the Chronicles aren't enough anymore, then we'll find another solution," Daniel said firmly. "Together, like we did before." He took her hand. "Emma, we can't let fear of what might happen stop us from living our lives. That would be giving the entity a different kind of power over us." Emma leaned her head against his shoulder, watching as the fireflies rose higher, their lights merging with the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "Okay," she whispered. "Together." Later that night, as Daniel slept beside her, Emma felt a subtle shift in the house around her, a lightening as if some pressure had been released. The whispers in the walls, which had become a constant background presence, fell silent. In that silence, Emma made a decision. She would continue the chronicles as promised, documenting everything for future generations of Holloways. But she would also live her life on her terms, with Daniel, with children if they chose to have them, with hope rather than fear. The entity beneath the Holloway house would have its offering of potential contained within the growing volumes of the family chronicles, but it would not have her future. That belonged to Emma alone. As if in response to her resolve, a gentle warmth spread through the room, and Emma felt herself drifting into the first truly peaceful sleep she had experienced since inheriting the house. The Holloway curse had been transformed into a Holloway legacy, one of knowledge, persistence, and the courage to rewrite the terms of one's own destiny. Autumn painted Savannah Creek in gold and crimson, leaves drifting from the ancient oaks surrounding the Holloway house. Emma sat on the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the morning chill, watching Daniel load the last of his belongings into his car. It had been 6 months since he'd moved to Georgia, accepting a position at a small college 30 minutes away. 6 months of shared discoveries, of adding to the chronicles, of building a life together in the shadow of the house's history. And 3 months since Emma had confirmed what the entity had apparently already known: she was pregnant. "Are you sure you don't want me to stay?" Daniel asked, closing the trunk. "I can reschedule the conference." Emma shook her head. "It's just a weekend. We'll be fine." She placed a protective hand over the slight curve of her abdomen. "Besides, you need to deliver those copies to your colleague." The copies were carefully selected portions of the chronicles. Information about the symbols of binding and protection, the history of similar properties in the southeast, theories about the entities beneath them. Nothing that would reveal the full truth about the Holloway house, but enough that others might recognize the patterns if they encountered something similar. A strategic insurance policy spread through academic channels under the guise of folklore research. "Call me if anything happens," Daniel insisted, kissing her goodbye. "Anything at all." Emma watched his car disappear down the long driveway, autumn leaves swirling in its wake. Despite her reassurances, she felt a flutter of unease at being alone in the house. The entity had been quiet in recent months, no whispers in the walls, no unexplained phenomena. But Emma knew it was still there, beneath the foundation stones, waiting and watching. She returned to the library, where she'd been transcribing a series of letters found in a trunk in the attic. Most were mundane correspondence between Holloways and business associates, but occasionally she found references to the special circumstances of the property or cryptic mentions of payments coming due. Around noon, Emma was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Curious, she wasn't expecting visitors. She went to the front window and saw a sleek black car she didn't recognize parked in the circular drive. A moment later, a knock came at the door. Emma opened it to find Mr. Harmon standing on her porch, impeccable as always in a charcoal suit, wire-rimmed glasses catching the midday light. "Miss Holloway," he greeted her with a slight bow. "May I come in? There's a matter of some importance we need to discuss." Though wary, Emma stepped aside to let him enter. "I'm surprised to see you, Mr. Harmon. It's been almost a year." "Indeed." He followed her to the library, his gaze sweeping over the piles of research materials and the leather-bound volumes of the chronicles. "I see you've been diligent in keeping your promise." Emma took a seat behind her desk, instinctively placing a barrier between herself and the lawyer. "What can I do for you?" Harmon remained standing, hands clasped behind his back. "It's come to my attention that certain information about the Holloway house and other properties with similar attributes has begun circulating in academic circles." Emma kept her expression neutral. "Is that so?" Professor Miller's recent presentation at the Southeastern Historical Society was quite illuminating, Harmon continued, referring to Daniel by his formal title. His paper on architectural anomalies and family tragedies in post-Civil War Georgia contained several details that should not be available outside this house. "My husband is an academic," Emma said calmly. He researches historical patterns. Any similarities to the Holloway situation are coincidental. Harmon's lips thinned. We both know that's not true, Miss Holloway. Or should I say, Mrs. Miller now? He gestured to the wedding band on her finger. You've found a loophole in your agreement. Clever, but dangerous. Are you threatening me, Mr. Harmon? Warning you, he corrected. The entity beneath this house has accepted your chronicles as substitute payment for now. But if knowledge of its existence spreads, if others begin looking for similar entities, disturbing the few that remain, it will not be pleased. Emma folded her hands protectively over her abdomen, a gesture that didn't escape Harmon's notice. Ah, he said softly. So it's true, the Holloway line continues. Why are you really here? Emma demanded, uncomfortable with his attention to her pregnancy. Harmon considered her for a long moment before reaching into his jacket and withdrawing an envelope. I've come to deliver this. It was left in my family's keeping by Margaret Holloway in 1906, with instructions that it be given to any Holloway who managed to break the cycle of deaths and produce a child. Emma accepted the envelope with surprise. The paper was yellowed with age, the wax seal cracked but still intact, bearing the impression of what appeared to be the Holloway family crest. Margaret knew this would happen? She asked, turning the envelope over in her hands. Margaret Holloway was an exceptional woman, Harmon replied. After Jonathan's death, she conducted her own research into the entity and the nature of the pact. What she discovered led her to believe that eventually a Holloway would find a way to alter the terms. Emma broke the seal and withdrew a single sheet of paper covered in Margaret's familiar handwriting, the same precise script Emma had seen in her journal. Read it, Harmon suggested. It may provide answers to questions you haven't yet thought to ask. The letter was brief but shocking. To the Holloway who breaks the chain. If you are reading this, you have found a way to survive beyond the 27th year and continue our bloodline. For this, I offer both congratulations and warning. What dwells beneath our house is older than human settlement in this land, but it is not unique. Such entities exist throughout the world, clustered along what the indigenous peoples called the thin places, where the boundaries between worlds are permeable. Jonathan did not stumble upon our entity by chance. He sought it out deliberately, guided by knowledge passed down through his mother's family, knowledge that originated with practices far older than our nation. The Holloway blood carries a marker, a genetic trait that makes us both vulnerable to these entities and capable of communicating with them. This marker will pass to your children and to their children after them. But blood is not destiny. The pact binds us, but it also grants power. The power to negotiate, to alter terms, to find balance between our world and theirs. Look to the oldest symbols in the foundation stones. They are not merely bindings, but a language, a means of communication. Learn it, use it. Find others with the marker. They exist in bloodlines you would not expect. The entity feeds on potential, on promise unfulfilled, but it can be satiated with offerings freely given rather than violently taken. Trust your blood. It remembers. Margaret Holloway, 1906. Emma looked up from the letter, her mind racing. The marker is genetic, and there are others with it? Harmon nodded. My family carries it as well, though more diluted than the Holloway line. It's why we've been able to serve as intermediaries for generations. And Blackwood? The same. The marker appears in bloodlines across the world, particularly in families with long histories of interaction with thin places, crossroads, caves, certain bodies of water. Harmon adjusted his glasses. Your child will carry it strongly, being of direct Holloway descent. Emma felt a protective surge. My child will make their own choices. They won't be bound to this house or the entity beneath it. Perhaps, Harmon conceded, but they will be drawn to places like this, to the entities that dwell in them. It's in the blood, an affinity that cannot be denied, only channeled. He glanced at his watch. I've fulfilled my obligation by delivering Margaret's letter. What you do with the information is your choice." He turned to leave, then paused. "One piece of advice, if I may. The chronicles you're creating, they're valuable beyond measure, not just to the entity, but to others who carry the marker, who might encounter these places without understanding what they are. Is that why you haven't tried to stop Daniel's research from circulating?" Emma asked, suddenly understanding. Harmon smiled thinly. "The Harmon family has its own priorities, Miss Holloway. Sometimes they align with the entity's wishes, sometimes with yours." With a slight bow, he took his leave. Emma sat for a long time after Harmon departed. Margaret's letter spread before her. The revelation that the connection to the entity was genetic, not merely supernatural, shifted her understanding of everything that had happened. She pulled the most recent volume of the Chronicles toward her and began to write, documenting Harmon's visit and the contents of Margaret's letter. But her mind was already racing ahead, considering the implications. If the marker was genetic, it could be studied, identified, perhaps even modified or protected against. And if others carried it, families connected to different entities in different thin places, then a network might exist, or could be created. For the first time since discovering the truth about the Holloway house, Emma felt something beyond resignation or determined resistance. She felt possibility. The entity beneath the house had existed for millennia, adapting to changes in the world above. Perhaps it was time for those who carried the marker to adapt as well, to move from isolation to connection, from victimhood to understanding. As if responding to her thoughts, Emma felt a flutter of movement within her womb, her child making their presence known. A child who would carry the Holloway blood, the marker, the potential for both vulnerability and power. "We'll figure this out together," she whispered, one hand on her abdomen, the other on Margaret's letter. "We'll rewrite the rules." Outside, the autumn wind picked up, sending leaves spiraling past the windows. Within the walls, the entity remained silent, but Emma sensed its awareness, its patient observation of her, and the new life growing within her. The game had changed. The pact remained, but the players were evolving. And in that evolution lay hope for a future beyond the cycle of fear and sacrifice that had defined the Holloway family for generations. Spring sunshine filtered through the stained glass transom above the front door, casting prismatic patterns across the foyer. Emma watched as her 5-year-old daughter, Maggie, named for Margaret Holloway, followed the shifting colors across the hardwood floor, her small hands trying to catch the light. "Mama, look, rainbow hands," Maggie exclaimed, holding up her palms streaked with reflected color. "Beautiful," Emma agreed, smiling at her daughter's wonder. Maggie had inherited Emma's dark hair and Daniel's curious nature, along with a sensitivity to the house that manifested in ways both ordinary and extraordinary. She spoke of friends in the walls that only she could see, drew symbols in her coloring books that resembled those on the foundation stones, and sometimes woke from dreams, speaking words in languages neither Emma nor Daniel recognized. All signs of the marker in her blood, growing stronger as she did. The doorbell rang and Maggie ran to answer it, knowing who would be waiting on the other side. Emma followed more slowly, one hand supporting her back, swollen with her second pregnancy. Dr. Eliza Chen stood on the porch, medical bag in hand. She was a geneticist from Emory University who had become both Emma's physician and research partner over the past few years. "Lizzie!" Maggie cried, throwing her arms around the doctor's waist. "Hello, my favorite research assistant," Dr. Chen laughed, returning Maggie's hug before looking up at Emma. "How are you feeling today?" "Big," Emma replied wryly, "and curious about what you found." They settled in the library, Maggie occupied with her coloring books while the adults spread research materials across the large oak table. Dr. Chen had become involved with the Holloway situation 3 years earlier, when Daniel had shared some of his folklore research with a colleague who happened to be married to a geneticist specializing in rare inherited traits. "The blood samples you provided show definitive results," Dr. Chen said, opening her laptop. The marker is located on chromosome 7, a previously unidentified genetic sequence that appears in less than 0.1% of the general population. She pulled up a series of images, microscopic photographs of cells with fluorescent markers highlighting specific genetic material. "And it's definitely the same marker found in the other families?" Emma asked, referring to the network they had gradually established over the years. Descendants of the other houses affected by Blackwood's dealings, plus several families Daniel had identified through his academic research. Dr. Chen nodded. "Identical in the core sequence, with minor variations unique to each bloodline. The Holloway variant is particularly strong, likely due to generations of proximity to the entity." Emma glanced at Maggie, who was drawing what looked suspiciously like one of the binding symbols from the Foundation, though Emma was certain her daughter had never seen the basement. "And the baby? The amniocentesis confirms it. He carries the marker too, possibly even more pronounced than Maggie's." Dr. Chen's expression softened. "But remember, Emma, this isn't necessarily negative. The marker appears to correlate with enhanced intuition, creative thinking, and heightened perception. Your children will face challenges, but they'll have advantages too. Advantages that come with a price," Emma murmured, remembering Margaret's letter. "Trust your blood. It remembers." Dr. Chen packed away her materials as Daniel arrived home from his classes. The two men greeted each other warmly, and Maggie immediately abandoned her coloring to leap into her father's arms. "Daddy, I made friends with the lady in the flowered dress today," she announced. Daniel shot Emma a questioning look over their daughter's head. "Elizabeth Holloway, I think," Emma said quietly, "the one who died in 1946. Daniel had grown accustomed to his daughter's ability to perceive the echoes of past Holloways that occasionally manifested in the house. These appearances had become less frequent and less substantial over the years, a side effect, Emma theorized, of her altered pact with the entity. After dinner and Maggie's bedtime, the adults gathered in the library again. Daniel poured drinks, while Emma updated the chronicles with Dr. Chen's latest findings. "We've identified 7 other families with the marker so far," Daniel said, reviewing his notes. 3 connected to Blackwood's properties, 2 from New England with ties to Salem, 1 in Louisiana with a history in the Bayou regions, and a family in Arizona living near a cave system the Native Americans considered sacred. "All thin places," Emma observed, using Margaret's term for locations where the boundary between worlds was permeable, and all with histories of unusual deaths or experiences. "But none with pacts as specific or binding as the Holloways," Dr. Chen pointed out. "Your great-uncle's deal was uniquely formal." Emma placed a hand on the latest volume of the Chronicles, "which is why these records are so important. We're creating a guide for others with the marker, a way to understand what they might be experiencing and how to negotiate with the entities they encounter." 10 years had passed since Emma first set foot in the Holloway house. The building itself had been transformed, fully restored, modernized where necessary, but with its historical character preserved. The grounds, too, had been renewed, with gardens planted according to designs found in Margaret's journals, incorporating plants known for their protective properties. But the most profound transformation had occurred in the relationship between the house, the Holloway family, and the entity beneath the foundation. On this warm summer evening, Emma stood on the porch watching her children play on the lawn. Maggie, now 10, was teaching her 5-year-old brother James how to identify the different herbs in the garden. Both children moved through the property with comfortable familiarity, untroubled by its history or the presence beneath. The whispers in the walls had grown silent years ago, replaced by a different kind of communication, a subtle awareness that Emma had learned to interpret, a language of sensation rather than sound. "They're flourishing here," Daniel said, joining her on the porch. "Despite everything we feared," Emma nodded, leaning against her husband's shoulder, "because we didn't hide the truth from them. They understand what this place is, what they carry in their blood." Inside the house, The chronicles had grown to fill an entire bookshelf, 10 volumes documenting the Holloway history, the nature of the entity, the properties of the marker, and the network of families they had connected across the country. A parallel set of records existed in secure digital form, shared among trusted researchers like Dr. Chen, and archived in multiple locations. Knowledge preserved but not contained, despite Emma's original pact. The entity had adapted to this change, just as it had adapted to countless shifts in the world above over its long existence. It still fed on the potential of the chronicles, but now also on the connections being formed, the understanding being developed, a different kind of unfulfilled promise, one with roots spreading far beyond the Holloway house. As darkness fell, Emma called the children inside. After baths and bedtime stories, when the house grew quiet, she made her way to the library to complete her daily entry in the chronicles. The final paragraph she wrote that night summed up the journey of the past decade. The Holloway inheritance has been transformed from a curse to a responsibility. Our blood carries the marker that makes us sensitive to the thin places and the entities that dwell in them. But that same blood gives us the ability to understand, to communicate, to establish boundaries that respect both our world and theirs. What Jonathan Holloway began as a pact of sacrifice, we continue as a covenant of knowledge, preserving the balance between worlds not through death, but through understanding. The entity beneath our home remains, ancient and patient, but no longer hungry for Holloway lives. It feeds now on our growing network of awareness, on the potential of connections yet to be made, mysteries yet to be solved. Our children will inherit not fear, but purpose, not a curse, but a legacy. The Holloway house stands at the threshold between worlds, and we are its keepers, not its prisoners. Emma closed the volume and placed it back on the shelf with its companions. Through the window, she could see the ancient oaks silhouetted against the star-filled sky, their branches swaying gently in the summer breeze. Beneath her feet, deep in the foundation of the house, the entity stirred in acknowledgement. Not a threat, but a presence, ancient and other, but now familiar. Emma smiled and switched off the library light. The Holloway house had claimed generations of her family, cutting their lives short at 27. But she had changed the terms, altered the pact, transformed the curse into something new. She was 37 now, a decade beyond the death sentence that had hung over her ancestors. Her children would grow up with knowledge she had lacked, strength she had had to find on her own. The house would always be part of them, the entity a shadow in their awareness, but they would never be victims. They would be custodians of the threshold, guardians of the balance, keepers of secrets meant to protect rather than harm. Emma climbed the stairs to the bedroom she shared with Daniel, each step a reminder of how far she had come from the fearful heir who had first entered this house a decade ago. The Holloway curse had ended. The Holloway legacy had just begun.